Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the 4 ways that Trump could rig the election. So there's been a lot of talk about how Trump is going to lose in November. There's also been a lot of talk about how Trump will refuse to leave the White House if he loses. But not enough people are talking about the ways that Trump and the Republican Party could suppress the vote and undermine the election even before any vote takes place. The groundwork is already being laid, and so we have to understand how the election could be rigged before it happens. Just before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more political analysis videos every weekend and hit that bell notification while you're at it. Number 1 is undermining mail-in ballots. Now, most of you have probably heard that Trump doesn't trust mail-in ballots and has claimed that they are rigged.
Mail ballots are a very dangerous thing for this country because they're cheaters. They go and collect them. They're fraudulent in many cases. The mail ballots are corrupt, in my opinion.
Despite evidence to the contrary, and despite the fact that over 70% of Americans support mail-in voting during the pandemic, he has also called to delay the election, which is unconstitutional for the president to do. But all this talk has also been accompanied by action. You see, Trump is trying to systematically and deliberately sabotage the United States Postal Service in order to undermine its ability to organize mail-in voting or postal voting. Trump has appointed businessman Louis DeJoy as the Postmaster General. Coincidentally, Louis DeJoy has donated over $360,000 to the Trump campaign and over $70,000 to the Republican National Committee. Unsurprisingly, he has done Trump's bidding by ordering postal workers to leave sacks of mail behind in order to avoid paying overtime, closing postal offices during lunchtime when many people need them, and taking postal machines out of post offices. All this without consulting the Board of Governors of the Postal Service or meeting with postal workers' unions. Louis DeJoy is not accountable to anyone except Trump, and so will do anything in his power to sabotage the Postal Service and undermine the election. But here's the thing. Trump claims mail-in voting will favor Democrats, despite the fact that there's no evidence that mail-in voting favors one party over the other. You see, it's not about whether mail-in voting will help or hurt Trump. Undermining mail-in voting does 2 things. Number 1, although mail-in voting itself does not favor any one political party, during this pandemic, Democrats are much less likely to risk their health going to the polls if mail-in voting is not available or is undermined in some way. And so by undermining mail-in voting, Trump can decrease voter turnout among Democrats, favoring Republicans. Number 2, Trump can use the idea that mail-in voting is corrupt to claim that the election was rigged. You see, in order to have universal mail-in voting, there will have to be a massive expansion in the capacity of the post office. By defunding and sabotaging the post office, Trump can ensure that not all votes will be counted on election day. In the days or even weeks that it takes for the results to come out, Trump can claim that the election was rigged or claim that he won. Trump's strategy is to delegitimize the election process itself in an effort to cling to power. If the election is close and disputed, it can be challenged in court, and you could well have a situation like in the year 2000, when the conservative-controlled Supreme Court handed the election to George Bush. Trump could do the same and have the conservative judges that he appointed hand him the election in court rather than through voting. Undermining the credibility of mail-in ballots is key to this strategy. Number 2 is shutting down polling places. This tactic is very simple. Shut down polling places in the areas where Democrats are likely to win. It's even better if these areas are populated by black and brown people who tend to vote Democrat. By having only a few polling places, this creates massive lines where there shouldn't be. This demoralizes many voters who get tired of waiting in line. Others have a tight scheduled jobs, and so they don't have the time to wait in line, and so they don't vote. And in some areas, the lines are so long that the polling place closes before everyone has a chance to vote. And this is exactly what Republicans have been doing. In June, Republicans tried out this tactic during the Democratic primary elections by closing 95% of polling places in the state of Kentucky. And more importantly, in Jefferson County, where the city of Louisville is, there was just one polling station. Now keep in mind, Jefferson County has over 766,000 people and 616,000 registered voters, but they had just one polling station. And the result was that countless people were still banging on the doors of the polling station after it closed because they didn't get a chance to vote. And this is not surprising because Jefferson County contains the city of Louisville, where most of the Democrats in the state are, and over half of the black Kentuckians live. Now, to be fair, during that election, they also increased the availability of mail-in voting. But these kind of tactics are an effective way of suppressing the Democratic vote. And the state of Kentucky is important because the Republican Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, is up for re-election. His favorability rating is just 27% compared to 46% unfavorable. But by rigging the election, he could still win. The same is happening in Texas, where Joe Biden is ahead in some polls. But Texas has shut down over 750 polling places, with the vast majority of those being closed in black and Latino areas that tend to vote Democrat. And so in this way, Trump could still win the state of Texas. Number 3 is voter purging. You see, in America, people have to register to vote, and so it's quite normal that people get removed from the voters' roll. In other words, they get purged if they die or move to another state. However, voter purging has also been used to decrease the number of people who are likely to vote Democrat. If your name is purged from the voters' roll, you can't vote. And if you can purge enough people from the voters' roll for reasons other than moving or dying in the areas that are likely to vote for the other party, you can win the election. And that's exactly what Republicans have been doing. In the swing state of Wisconsin, over 230,000 voters have been purged. Now keep in mind, Trump only won the state of Wisconsin by 23,000 votes. So voter purging can make a real difference in the election result. And analysis shows that of the 230,000 who were purged, the majority were from areas that voted for Democrats in 2016. Similarly, in the swing state of Ohio, 158,000 voters were purged from the rolls. Voters in the 3 largest counties that tend to vote Democrat were twice as likely to be purged from the rolls as voters in areas that vote Republican. Now you might say, well, even if that's the case, surely the people getting purged are mostly people who have moved to another state. No. Out of the 158,000 people purged, over 40,000 errors were found on the list of voters set to be purged. And in a close race, that can make a difference. So again, in another swing state, voter purging can make a difference in the election, and it's going to benefit Republicans. And this is not just speculation, it has already happened. In 2018, Republican Brian Kemp was running for governor in Georgia. And because he was the Secretary of State of Georgia at the time, he was running the election that he was competing in. And he used that power to purge over 300,000 people from the voters' roll in Georgia. 120,000 of those people were removed because they were so-called inactive voters. That means the last time they voted was in 2012. This is the so-called use it or lose it rule, which allows them to purge infrequent voters. Infrequent voters are more likely to vote Democrat. But aside from that, the entire basis of the use it or lose it rule is nonsensical. Voting is a right, not a privilege, and it shouldn't be made more difficult to do just because you haven't voted in a while. And this tactic worked. Brian Kemp won by a razor-thin margin of just 1.4% by essentially rigging the election. And so in this way, voter purging is being used not just to remove dead or out-of-state voters, but people who are likely to vote Democrat. Number 4 is intimidation tactics. Trump will try to intimidate voters using several methods. One is by deploying troops onto the streets.
Today I'm announcing a surge of federal law enforcement into American communities plagued by violent crime.
This is already happening right now. Against the wishes of local authorities, Trump is deploying federal forces onto the streets in unmarked vans without any form of identification or accountability. In other words, a secret police to attack and kidnap protesters.
Kidnapping people.
You just violated their rights.
These same secret police forces can and will be used to intimidate voters in major cities, in key swing states where it can make a difference. Another method is so-called voter caging. Basically, this involves sending so-called poll watchers to monitor the vote. These poll watchers will be volunteers, Trump supporters, who will report that a voter is ineligible to vote and will challenge their vote at the polling station. Someone whose vote is challenged on the grounds that they are ineligible to vote may not be allowed to vote or will be given a provisional ballot, which is usually never counted. By challenging people's votes in minority areas, this causes delays, making people wait for hours, which demoralizes people, and so they go home and don't vote. By targeting this practice in areas more likely to vote Democrat, Trump can suppress the Democratic vote on election day, regardless of what the polls say. Now, last time, I made a video on why Trump is likely to lose the election, but that assumes that all people will be able to vote fairly. This is the kind of stuff you would expect to see in third world countries. These are the kind of tactics they use in Russia or Zimbabwe. But they are being used right here, right now, in the United States. If this was happening in another country, the United States would have already invaded to bring them democracy. If the Republican Party cannot win by changing minds, they will try to win by changing the rules. Now, I could tell you that you need to check whether you are still registered to vote. I could tell you to put pressure on your local authorities. I could even tell you that the final day to vote by mail is October 20th, 2 weeks before the election. But there is one proven way to overcome Trump's rigging and dirty tactics. The key thing to understand about all these tactics is that they will only work if the election is close. And that's why Americans need to show up in overwhelming numbers to oust this president. Vote in overwhelming numbers to defeat Trump, to defeat Trumpism, and to defeat the Republican Party. If conservatives become convinced that they cannot win democratically, they will not abandon conservatism. They will reject democracy. To learn about how campaign finance undermines American democracy, click here. Thank you to my Patreons for making this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.